Well, grand rising, beautiful day. Hello, everyone. This is Brian M. Truskowski. Welcome to the Illuminated podcast. I'm going to be interviewing a dear, dear friend, mentor, and longtime friend and colleague, Stephen McLean. He's a beautiful soul. We had so much to talk about. He's actually the person that inspired this entire podcast. So I'm so grateful to have him on the show. We're breaking it into two parts. Okay. So the first half can be about 35 minutes or so. The second half is a little bit longer than that. Either way, so stay tuned to both halves. They're going to be released 1 week apart from each other. So it's going to be beautiful. And if you're watching this in the post, just go ahead and click the link above and you'll take you to the second one after you watch the first. Either way, it's a beautiful conversation around changing concepts. The first conversation is around just sort of laying the foundation of who he is and basic concepts of how we are changing and evolving, and giving some basic premises to how we can think differently in the world. Part two is really diving into the nuggets of it, providing more practical stuff and more larger frameworks to go, oh, the world's changing in this really crazy way from a spiritual perspective and elsewise. What can we do to be more on grasp? How can we ride the wave instead of get pulling into the surf, right? As this world is evolving spiritually and physically, right? So with that, this is a bit of a primer for you. So without further ado, we're going to go into the show. I just wanted to give you a heads up of what you're getting into. Anyway, enjoy the show, part one, part two. And thank you all for listening. Thank you for being a part of this beautiful podcast. And please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share the video, share these conversations as they continue to evolve over time. So thank you all for being on this journey. Without further ado, on with the wonderful picture show. 3.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Illuminated Conversations podcast. I am your host, Brian M. Truskowski with Illuminate. And today I have a wonderful dear friend, mentor, and guest here, Stephen Healing. He's a wonderful, humorous man with lots of wisdom and knowledge in this earthly experience. So we're going to go into some interesting places today, and I'm excited to explore that with him and with you. And as always, as I've sort of said in this conversation, be open to something new, be open to going back and thinking about it and talking with friends and sharing this conversation with other people. Be open to be challenged and be open to hearing things you maybe never heard before, because some of it I've never heard before in some sort of sense. But either way, super excited to be here. Steve, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. I love that we are doing this. And actually, Steve is the person who's inspired this series of the podcast. So it's so awesome that you are here as the inspiration of all of this. So thank you for that. So with that, in your humble and meekness, sir, give some people some background, whatever you feel that is important to you that you want to share, that's going to lead us into this conversation about where you've been in this earthly realm, leading us to the present moment.
Great. And I think it's okay for, I was thinking of the term Stephen Healing as being kind of a moniker in case I ever completed any of the books that I've started writing. And so, but I'm Stephen McLean, because some of my friends, clients may watch this. And so it would just, we don't want them to start off completely confused, like, did the alien change his name?
They did.
And I am a registered alien, so it's good to just start off. Full disclosure, that I have a card, registered alien card. And so, so background, and it'll be interesting, part of my background has been studying language, and principally for the last 30 some years, neuro-linguistic programming. And so some people have issues with the term programming. And I think that's good to have issues with the term programming, because as we may have experienced, there is such a thing as televised programming. And so one can watch TV and all of a sudden their whole reality is based on what they heard from Rachel Maddow or whoever might have been. And her name just comes to my mind because I found her very entertaining.
I'll put Tucker Carlson as a hag tag. People like, oh, they're going to watch this show now. But go.
Oh yeah. But now we got all the people that love Rachel and Tucker and whoever else that might pop in.
Right.
So background. I started studying kind of energy healing using the process that was just opening up in Pasadena, California, with John Thie, called Touch for Health. And it was an applied kinesiology process. And I had met a woman, I was going to haircutting school, and I met a woman who he was her chiropractor, and I told her about my interest in going to chiropractic college, and she said, well, then you need to meet and study with this person. So I did. So while I was going to haircutting school, I was taking classes at John Thie's office. And that was my kind of introduction to energetic healing, energetic medicine. Whatever, medicine's a strange term because it refers to drugs, and so the largest drug dealers, on the planet have been very active over the last few years.
Yes.
So in terms of medicine, I probably should, at some point look up what actually the term medicine means, but I studied kind of vibrational healing, energetic medicine, energy work with John Thie in Pasadena while I was in chiropractic college. And then I went off, when I was in haircutting school. So then I went off to chiropractic college in 1977 in Davenport, Iowa. And I was there for 3.5 years. And I graduated in 1980, and then ended up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, to help a person out there so they could have a little time off from the practice. And my practice got so busy so fast that I ended up spending 32 years there. And really enjoying my time. So when I moved out to, we could talk about, we could talk some about kind of the work that I did while I was doing my chiropractic practice, which was very light touch, low impact. Good result chiropractic, but just very, very gentle form, always more of a bit of an energy type of healing work. And so in the 80s, I was also training, late 70s, early 80s, training in something called attunement, which was a form of energy work that was associated with a spiritual group that I had a 12-year association with. So the more I worked with energy, the more I realized, how powerful changes could be when people let go. And so that ended up turning out to be the process is when people felt like they were safe, they could let disturbing energies come up, whether they did that verbally, where they're actually talking about these energies, or whether they just let them up and into the space. Once those disturbing energies are up, there's a greater chance for them to be released. And what I mean by those energies being up is there's a lot of traditions that have studied where different emotions are held. So, many of the traditions, I would work and I would realize people were letting something out of their lungs, and then the energy would feel like grief. Or people were letting something out of their liver, and the energy might feel like anger. And so in my own course of experience and then study, in terms of what various traditions felt about the organ emotional relationships, what I became aware of is that certain emotions were stored, like put into a closet. So they might be put into the liver if they were more anger related. They might be put into the lungs if they were more grief related. And so as people began to allow these emotional energies to come to the surface, they began to let go of the emotions. And as they let go of the emotions, it would go from being a traumatic experience to an experience. Because it's only when it's resolved that we see it particularly as a traumatic experience. But once it's emotionally resolved and the process is integrated, you'll see a person who maybe, and I think this has occurred for so many people, maybe they had sexual trauma, kind of a way early introduction to sex, as children, maybe with adults and stuff. And so I've noticed this being part of the package in the world. And so when people would come back to those memories, experiences, emotions, they would just be enraged, so you'd just be like, and you were just there with them in this energy. And then once that energy released, period of time later, they would say, yeah, as a child, I was sexually abused, and there'd be no energy. Or as a child, I was introduced to sexuality way too early, and there'd be no energy. So kind of the key from my perspective, so it's started in 1972 when I started studying Touch for Health. So it's been a little over 50 years, 72, 73. A little over 50 years that I've had this focus and intention on understanding how people store these events and how they can release them. So that led up to present time. So,
and I'll even say I've had a few sessions with you that were under the calm of past life, let's just call it, and how initially when I went into the experience, it was very traumatic, and you paused me and I sort of like pulled out like 3D matrix style, observed and go, oh, it's just that happening. And all of a sudden all the charge was gone. I'm like, oh, there it is. I'm laying on the ground about to be, whatever. And so
yeah.
I've had a few of those experiences with you, and even in my own world too, right? Outside of practice with you, but it seems crazy. So let's just sort of pause and maybe take that idea, which may be radical to some, and just take it apart for a second and going, okay, it's taking the emotional charge out of the experience, because we can't change the experience, but we can take the emotional charge out of it by doing energy release or whatever, correct?
Right. We can let go of the emotional charge. So we all have these abilities that basically our confidence comes from our experiences, both positive and negative. So there's the experience of, boy, I don't ever want to do it that way again. And there's like, oh, that worked really well. I wonder if there's an even better way. So when we're in this experiential, and I think, you and I had this wonderful conversation last night, which leads me to think about the bit of conversation that we had this morning before we started recording this. And I was telling you about that I had done a tarot reading. So there's a few things we'll just kind of stick with here a little bit and see if we include them. But one, if you mention tarot, there may be some people who have some religious, belief systems where they go, oh, tarot. And it's like, it's just another construct. There's all sorts of constructs. And so, but anyway, I pulled a card for this morning, like what is the possible meaning of what we're doing today? And the card that I pulled, and I'm going to just read it briefly. I'll show you the card. It's a very pretty card.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
3 of Cups.
Yeah, the 3 of Cups. And the 3 of Cups is related to abundance. And the cups in the tarot are related to emotions. So it talks about emotional abundance. And I'm actually feeling the energies begin to move as I'm looking to read these. So someone who's watching, watching this later when it gets posted, at this point, they can say, oh, he's feeling these energies moving, and I'm a professional. People actually pay me, and that's all it takes to be a professional. If somebody gives you $1, you're a professional. So if you make somebody breakfast and you go, that'll be $1, you're a professional. So I have all these dollar bills for all the professions, all the things I've had people pay me $1 for and sign it. This is for this service or that service,
That's
making
great.
me professional. Like today, if you would send me $1, I'd be a professional YouTube consultant, whatever.
We'll make it happen, Steve.
Right. Huh?
We'll make it happen.
We'll make it happen. So emotional abundance, the Three of Cups. This is an overflowing abundance of positive feelings that one desires to communicate to three very important people: you, and you. Abundance of feelings coming out in rays of light that want to be communicated, which is Mercury, the communicator messenger, to someone emotionally important, possibly a family member. And this is Mercury in Cancer. But we're coming to a place where many of us are waking to the fact that everyone's emotionally important because they're here on the planet. And their emotions are important, and our emotions are important. And there's much of a movement from a head-based construct to a heart-based construct. So coming from our intellect, coming from how intelligent we sound, to coming from how it feels like we actually are feeling. How are we feeling, and how do we feel to others? And there's an authenticity when one comes from the heart that you've demonstrated over and over again. When you come from that heart place, there's an authenticity of you just being your authentic self. So we encourage people to do this, to get really in touch with their heart. And sometimes when you get in touch with your heart, there can be pain, because the heart is one of the organs that stores emotions. So if you begin to come into that heart space and you experience pain, and the heart can store pain of any kind. So the heart can store grief and loss. It can store anger. It can store fear. So all of those, some of the organs are more specific. I only store fear. That'd be
Kidneys
like,
are so limited in that, man. I tell you what.
I know. The organs are just like big babies. I don't do grief. But when a person is drawn towards this card, it's an indication that there's an outpouring of love and positive feelings towards three very significant people in his or her life. These feelings should be honored, and the individual should tell each of the three people of those that you love, appreciate, and have positive feelings towards you, and you, and you.
Well,
So I thought that was very sweet.
I love that. And I just want to add on to what you just said. There's this old saying, and I know we're going to try to drop all the old sayings where they came from, but the hardest journey is from the 18 inches from the head to the heart. I've added an addendum to that. And the even harder journey from going to the head to the heart is the 8 inches from the heart to the mouth, right? Because it's one thing to feel our emotions, but it's another thing to communicate. And that's what Mercury is about, communication, right? Emotional communication, Mercury and Cancer, right? So like, how can we convey the stuff that's in our heart, like, as you said, giving gratitude and appreciation, right? Like, we can feel it, but how much more difficult is it sometimes for someone to say, I love you, or thank you, right?
Right, because that entails those energies moving. And one of the things I think we're all experiencing at this time is what it's like to have energies moving more often, more consistently, more frequently. And when we think energy is moving, that's a good thing. Well, there's things that can be referred to as dark nights of the soul. And maybe when you come out on the other side of that, you go, that was great. But when you're in the middle of it, I very seldom hear people saying, this is so great. I'm so glad my whole life feels like it's being destroyed.
and collapsed and nothing makes sense. And who
collapse.
am I and who are you?
There's
And
no hope. And nothing's ever going to be good again. And all that energy that many of us have experienced. And a lot of people might have experienced this for the first time over the past few years. Because I think it's silly and yet true to say, well, the past 3 years seem to have been very difficult. And I had some pre-knowledge to what was going to be happening over the past 26 years now, because of an experience I had in 1997. And I won't go into all the details of what it took me to get to the place where I could have that experience in 97. But in 1997, I got to be part of a process which was really setting into motion the next 28 years and what would be happening. And so I think it's really useful to understand that the first 7 years, so from 97 to 2004, there was a cleansing of the physical body. 4 to 2011, emotional body. 2011 to 2018, mental body. And those I may have reversed, because I may have them reversed. But then 2018 to 2025 is the cleansing of the spiritual body. So since 2018, we've been having this stuff coming up. And it was slower in 2018 and 2019, and then it started to get momentum. In 2020, it was like we are presented with these horrifying thoughts, which was basically what they were. They were horrifying thoughts. And if we've ever had an experience where someone began talking about something that triggered a strong emotion that may have been related, and we'll get to this thing of past lives, but may have been related to some past life trauma, and they're emotionally triggered and they don't necessarily understand why. But I do healing work. I set up fields. I help people to make changes, which they're making, and I'm basically holding the field for the changes and helping to ground the energy of the change. But then the first 6 clients that I had after these traumatic words of pandemic were spoken and broadcast out, and many people were triggered. The next 6 sessions that I had in a row had to do with people remembering loss of life during pandemics. So even if people weren't conscious of what was happening, they were triggered and they went into fear. And it's understood that the greatest sales technique has to do with make people really afraid and then sell them a solution. So the medical profession has been doing this for years. They'll say, well, you're going to die, or you can do what I suggest. And people go, well, I'd rather not die. So, okay, I'll do what you suggest. But they're only oftentimes given this one suggestion, which happens to be what the person does, So if the person is dealing drugs, they go, well, just take this drug for the rest of your life,
Right. Or we can go back in time. Or we can go back in time and I'm going to cut you and put a leech on it, and it's going to make you live, another 5 years longer, right? And great, good. Stick the leech on me, we'll be good.
Yeah. Yeah, which is basically what they seem to be doing again. But that's that whole recycling of things that worked in the past. Let's just do them again.
Yeah.
So it really doesn't matter to me whether people believe in past lives or don't believe in past lives. It matters more to me is what people's experiences have been in this life. And if they can just resolve their experiences that are unresolved in this lifetime, then they're going to be better off. Because the more we can let go of these emotional charges related to the past, the more we're present, and the more hopeful or the more possibilities we see in the future that we're coming into. So the more we're like constantly being triggered and being triggered into fear, and then maybe that's triggering grief and anger and all those different emotions, which the last 3 years have been just incredible. And people are trying to find solutions. And so my suggested solution, which has worked very well for me over the past few years, and 26, whatever, is to learn to separate our story or our belief from the emotions, because it's the emotions that keep the story going. The emotions are like the hamster running that wheel of your story. And when the emotions are taken off the wheel stops. I mean, the larger wheel keeps moving, but that little individual running stops. And so a process that I learned that is just something we can give to the people that watch this is a process that involves, first of all, understanding, and you can think about this. This is when you started off in the beginning, you talked about you may get some ideas that are different than yours and that you might want to just consider them. So here's one to consider, that all of our beliefs, every single one of our beliefs, are based in unresolved experiences from the past. Because the only reason we need beliefs is to feel safe in a world that doesn't feel safe to us because we've had these traumas and we haven't gotten over them.
So say that one more time. All of our beliefs are based in unresolved
traumas and the unresolved emotions related to these traumatic experiences that we experienced as traumatic because they're outside of our reality when they happened. So if you have a reality, and because this happens so frequently in terms of work I do with people, where they uncover these sexual inappropriate activities that happened for them as young people, children, and whatever. So it's a good one to use, because it may be that people who watch this will go, oh gosh, I think that happened. And it's not to put that into a person's consciousness that happened. And if they've had this issue show up for them and feeling of like dysfunctional sexual experiences and stuff have been kind of a thing in their life, then this may help. And the idea is that we want to, and this is an idea, it's just a construct, and it's just something you can play with or ignore completely and never think about again. It's really up to you. The idea that all of our beliefs are based in unresolved experiences. So the process we want to go through is basically resolving all the emotions related to all the stories that have created our beliefs so we can come into the present moment. So just start off with one. You don't have to clear all your beliefs, all the emotions about all your experience. Obviously, you and I have taken many years of doing this and got through this one and got through that one. So
let's make it practical, and then we'll wrap up, and we'll probably do a part 2 on this, so you can stay tuned for part 2.
Yeah.
But we'll make it practical. For example, I don't know why this example is coming to my head, but a banana, right? People may have a weird experience with it, and I don't mean this in the sexual sense.
People may have a weird experience with a banana.
Well, just listen to me. I'll give it more practical, not a sexual version of this. A woman I dated a number of years ago had a latex allergy, so she didn't eat bananas. Previously me dating her, I used to love eating bananas. After I started dating her, I really don't eat bananas anymore because there's something in her field that made me like adverse to bananas. And now whenever I see bananas, I think, oh, there's latex in that. And that reminds me of this woman that I dated. And I'm like, whatever. I don't care about bananas anymore. So for me, whenever I see bananas, I have this association that's clearly there's something unresolved in my own being around this. And so if I do the work to remove whatever unresolved emotion I have around bananas latex in this woman, all of a sudden it's gonna be like, oh, it'll be like a dream, but like, yeah, it no longer brings up a charge for me anymore, right?
Yeah.
Or you date a woman that has a blue festiva, right? And every time you see a blue festiva for the rest of your life, you think of that person, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever it may
Anchoring.
be.
I think that term that's oftentimes used is anchoring, which is associating different things. So blue festiva, this relationship,
Right.
and they're anchored. So when you see that, or if you were in an auto accident and it was with a yellow car, and all of a sudden you see a yellow car and you go into that accident, those are associations or anchors to that trauma. So there can be many, many of these.
Right.
But just to kind of finish up in this portion, what we can do is when we feel triggered. So when we feel like a lot of emotions coming to the surface, maybe out of a conversation or an event or the vibration of the room, whatever, we have a lot of emotions coming up. If we just be present with the emotions, so we're feeling them, they're coming up, and we go, oh, okay, and we can identify them if we want, that's fine. Like we might be feeling it in the throat or in the chest, and so it might be some grief surfacing. So, or we might be feeling it in the heart. It just doesn't matter. We're feeling these kind of intense energies surfacing, and actually we're doing it right now. So you might be feeling these intense because we're talking about it, so we're doing it. Because oftentimes when you talk about it, you just do it. So we're feeling these intense energies coming up. And so we put the story or the belief that we may discover comes up with it. Like, let's just say, I'm not worthy or I'm not good enough. That's a good story. A lot of people have gotten that one from the environment. So I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy. So we put that story in our right hand, and then we put the emotions of that story in our left. And as soon as we get them separate,
Oh, you're pulling them apart.
Nothing holding on to the emotions. And so then the emotions can just release.
So you're pulling them apart out of one into two.
You can say that. You can say that. And it would be different for each person. So people's models will be different. So you have a tendency, in my observation of your description, you have a tendency of talking about pulling yourself out of something, and you go to the head, pulling myself out of it. So that's a kind of a mental construct. I can do this with my mind. And so pulling them apart is, again, kind of a mental construct, which is fine because all of these things work. Otherwise, we wouldn't keep doing them. Some of them don't work and we keep doing them, and that's the definition of insanity. But what I'm talking about is separating them. So for many people who have had children, they'll recognize that you go to your room, you go to your room. You just separate them and then let them work it out and then come back out after they've worked it out. Well, it's kind of that idea. The story is the child going into one room, the right-hand room, and the emotions is the child going into the other room, the left-hand room. And once those two are separated, they just work it out. And when it's done, the emotions have released and the story has no charge. And you can bring the story back in and think about it, talk about the belief or the story or whatever, and notice there's no charge on it. And so there's no charge for this. That's a free, like, one of the more amazing things that I've discovered. And I've, of course, when I say I've discovered, I mean whoever I am, because who really knows who we are? And who are these people talking inside my head? Who really are those as well? So So if you find yourself having these conversations in your head, just be kind to all those parts of yourself, because everything responds better to kindness. It just does. So just be kinder and be observant, curious.
Curiosity, curious.
Curiosity and cats and yeah. And then compassionate, which is just start with yourself. Be compassionate towards yourself. Really realize no matter what age you are, you've been through a lot. And that's how we learn. That's how we learn to function and survive and live on this interesting place on this interesting planet. But be kind to yourself. Be compassionate towards yourself. And be as loving towards yourself as you can be, because those are just good energies to run through your system. So that's probably, well, with a bit of editing, we might get this down to 20 minutes.
We're well into 30 minutes at this point. But either way, it's a great pausing point. And maybe as a teaser for those that are listening, this will be the launching point for what we'll go into. Maybe we'll go into more practical aspects like we were talking about of, words and premises and actions. And, oh, I learned it from here and it means this, but actually, how do I feel about it? Do I actually believe this, or am I saying it because, my daddy always said, sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So
yeah.
Brilliant. We'll pause here. So stay tuned to the next episode. Or if you're already watching it, click the link. We'll take you to the next episode. But to be continued, right, Steve? We'll talk.
Yeah.
Cliffhangers, just like this cliff. We're going to jump off the cliff into that deep water.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Leave any comments below, and be sure to watch the next episode where we're going to go deeper into this conversation. So be well.
And like and subscribe.
Something like that.
If you subscribe, you should subscribe. I don't know. I've never done it myself, but I've been told to do it many times. Like, subscribe. So you just keep repeating it. And then someday, everyone is going to be making millions of dollars from somebody pushing a like button. There you go. So
help me out with that idea. All right. We'll say goodbye for now, but we'll say hello in 5 more minutes. So take care.
Okay. Bye. Hello. The one thing I love, one of the many things I love about you, Brian, is your flexibility and your ability to just step back and then move forward and just work with whatever situation that arises. It's been very fun. I did get an opportunity to watch some of your experiences in your bus build out and found those videos. And for me, what always impresses me about anyone is their ability to do something that scares me. So when I think about, taking an expensive piece of Formica or whatever, and then just cutting a big hole in it, it's like, oh, I wouldn't want to be the person doing that. And yet you're just like, okay, here we go. You're just cutting through it.